Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Beth Flanzbaum. I'm a social worker, and I used to work at Brigham and Women's in Boston in the International Mesothelioma program, where I spent 7 years supporting patients and families through this disease. And one of the things I've learned in the course of my work is that you cannot do this alone. That the most successful outcomes that I've seen happen when people have large support networks and rely on those support networks. And I really spent a great deal of time working with families and caregivers. So, and my personal belief is that this disease affects everyone who it touches. And so I'm really glad to have two people who are going to speak about the effects of the illness on their families. They're each going to introduce themselves, and then we're going to open the floor up for questions immediately about how they've handled their illness and their families. And we have some other talking points if people's questions sort of die. So, Claudine, do you want to start?
Hi, this is like the second time I've introduced myself today, so you probably already know who I am. But I'm Claudine Benmar. I'm from Seattle. My husband, Pete, had peritoneal mesothelioma. He passed in January 2019 and was diagnosed in November 2016. We have two daughters. They were 13 and 16 at the time that he was diagnosed. So we had a couple years of dealing with it as a family, including two relocations to a different city for treatment. So I am happy to talk a little bit about that, or just how we, brought up the idea at the beginning with our kids. As well as I'm happy to talk about kind of our communications as a couple as well. So.
Great. Thank you, Claudine. Shane?
Here we go. Get it figured out. My name is Shane Smith, and I was diagnosed on July 18th of last year. And it actually had taken us a couple of months to get the results. I had a prostatectomy before. It took about 2.5 months for them to figure out that I also had mesothelioma. And so then, that kind of put us on this journey that we're on now. And I have my wife's here, Allison, and we have 3 kids, ages 27, 24, and 19.
So I wonder if it makes sense maybe to start talking a little bit about what it was like to tell your children. And I don't know if people have any questions about that process.
I'll go ahead and start because I distinctly remember that the strategy we used at the beginning was to try as much as possible to stop them from Googling mesothelioma. Just because the information that's out there is very scary, and so I think that at the beginning we just said, Dad has cancer, and it's a serious cancer, but we're looking into treatment, and I also remember that at the beginning one of the things we did was go through all the people that were close to us in our lives who we knew had been diagnosed with cancer and had successfully treated it, so that they could think of it as a treatable condition. It was important for us, especially at the beginning, to make sure that they felt like this was a problem that our family was facing, but that we were handling it.
I'm just curious, at what point did you decide to tell your children?
Oh, I mean, about the cancer in general? Yeah, I mean, right away, because, our older daughter, no, they were both home at the time. So, I mean, it was pretty much the first opportunity that we could all be together in person. We told them.
Thank you. Shane?
So I got my diagnosis at like 4:00 on a Tuesday afternoon, and it was obviously it's very disorienting when you get that information, but one of the main concerns coming out of that is how are we going to tell our kids about this? And so we waited a day or two before we actually broke the news to them. And my two older daughters, they're out of the house. My son lives at home with us. And, we called our daughters eventually, and then I told my son in person. But I think one of the challenges in all of that was, like, I'm not a super emotional person, so I wasn't crying over the diagnosis. I mean, you felt like a bomb had gone off, but also you're trying to figure out how do you manage this from kind of your own world, but you're also trying to manage how am I going to control their emotions as well, and because you feel a responsibility for the weight that they're going to have to carry from this. And so that was one of the struggles that I had early on, was just how do I manage not only my kids' emotions, but then friends, and everybody comes up to you and they have different reactions to your, telling them that you have mesothelioma. And so for us, what kind of changed in that whole process was, it was actually later on when, right before I had high-pec surgery, we had met with a surgeon, and he had come back with some, saying it was much more advanced than what he thought it would be. And he was kind of listing out worst-case scenarios. And so my daughters were in that appointment. We came home, and we were sitting around the living room, and my oldest daughter just broke down and started crying. And was like, I don't feel like we're talking about this. And she's like, you're just not showing much emotion. I feel like we're not dealing with this. And so then we all just cried. And it was kind of at that point, I think there was a turning point, at least in my mind. It was, I don't have to manage their emotions or manage everyone else around me. I can just go through this process with them and grieve, and we can walk this together, instead of me trying to feel like I've got to juggle my own cancer, I've got to juggle this diagnosis, I've got to juggle the emotions of everybody. And at some point, it was at that point where I felt, okay, I can just kind of lay that stuff down.
Great, thank you. How did you both determine who you were going to tell within your support network?
I think immediate family, came first. I didn't tell friends until we were, until it was, well, I told close friends immediately, but sort of my local friends, my friend group that, became the meal train and all of that, I literally went for, 6 different walks individually with friends to tell them, that we're about to go to Omaha for a few weeks and we won't be around. It was, I think I was doing those walk and talks up until like right the day before we left town. So yeah, I guess once you get beyond immediate family, it sort of felt like a need to know basis. And they needed to know because we were not going to be in town. Part of that was driven by, my husband was just a very private person, and so respecting his comfort level with wanting to broadcast it to the world.
Yeah, we started off with kids, family, close friends, and just kind of went out from there. And then eventually, I don't know, maybe it was 3 or 4 days later, we kind of made a broader announcement just on Facebook or whatever, and set up a caring bridge. But yeah, it was just start off small and then kind of grew from there.
Is there anything?
I'm sorry. Sorry, I was just going to say he never posted anything on Facebook about it. So, and we did a site. It was called Rallyhood. I don't even know if it still exists, but it was basically a caring bridge equivalent.
Well, I think in posting it broadly, we weren't prepared for the onslaught of messages, and actually she managed most of that, but it became quickly overwhelming, just the number of messages and the feeling that you've got to respond to all of these messages, and it kind of adds another layer of just stress in the whole situation.
Yeah, for sure.
I've heard people talk about how re-traumatizing that can be, to have to keep repeating things over and over again. Is there anything you would have done differently, both of you, in terms of talking about it with friends and or family?
I actually asked my daughter after the fact, my older daughter, and she at first said, well, you guys had some indications because the surgeon had alluded to the fact that it may be mesothelioma before I got my official diagnosis, but he's like, it's a long shot, probably not. And so we kind of thought, well, maybe. But then when we told them, we didn't really tell them the severity of it, and it's a difficult thing to juggle because you don't want to be completely pessimistic and say this may be the end result, but you don't want to gloss over it either. And so, she said, I wish you would have been more upfront with us about what kind of the severity of the disease. But then later in the conversation, she was like, well, also it was probably good you didn't. So I don't know. I think, and I think you just have to kind of give yourself grace in that situation because you're doing the best you can. And, we're going to screw up sometimes how we tell people or how we manage this or how we process emotions. But, I don't know that there's anything I would have done different necessarily. But
I would say the same. I think that, in order to try to make everything seem manageable, we also maybe downplayed the severity of it. But because it happened, over the course of 2 years, we gradually got more and more communicative about the scope of this beast that we were facing. I think they were, ready by the time treatment ended. I don't know. You get a lot of people wanting to come visit, and I didn't really have a good system for dealing with that or knowing what to say. And so I feel like I wish I would have been a little bit more prepared for that.
I've often encountered people who, and we've sort of touched on it, about people asking what they can do to help, which I think many people in this situation find very frustrating. So how did you manage that question of what can I do to help?
I let Allison answer those questions.
It's the worst. It's just so what's terrible about it is I find myself doing the exact same thing when somebody I know is struggling. Or was like, let me know what I can do to help, and I'm like, I hated it when people said that to me, but I guess I keep in mind the people whose help I appreciated the most, and I try to model myself on their example. One of my friends said, you're going to have a lot of people wanting to visit you. Like, if we have a spare room and a spare car, they're more than welcome to. And that was just a wonderfully specific thing to offer. I did tell people that I would want to go on walks. And so, I had all sorts of people coming and just saying, let's just schedule a walk for Tuesday at 2. And, just kind of wanting people to take initiative instead of putting the burden on me. But that's just in terms of how I have learned to be a better support system for others. For getting support for myself is just learning how to say yes to anything, any offer of help.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The people who were the most helpful were the ones that knew that we needed something and just said, hey, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, instead of just the broad question of what can we do to help.
I'm so glad you said that. I also encountered people, though, who are hesitant to accept help because they don't want to put people out. And I've struggled with that many times and often said, if the shoe was on the other foot, what would it feel like for you to have your offer of help rejected? Because I think that for many people who are used to being in charge of their lives, to suddenly have such a change occur, it's hard to sort of go into a receiving role rather than a giving role. So, before we move on to other questions, does anybody have any comments they would like? Oh my goodness. All right, who's in charge of the microphone?
Yeah. raised their hand. I'll start here. Is it on? Claudia, you mentioned that your family... Claudia, what?
Claudine.
Claudine, I'm sorry. Okay. You mentioned that your family relocated multiple times for treatment, and I would be interested in learning more about how you did that, how you decided to do that, because you're moving children and changing schools. Like, were they long-term moves, or?
No, it was made much simpler by not including the kids in the but that was complicated by we had to find people who could stay in our house with them so they could stay in their own schools. But yeah, we went. He had 2 high-pec surgeries with the wonderful Dr. Jason Foster at Nebraska, and each time was 5 weeks total with the surgery plus recovery time. We moved into an Airbnb, and his parents were with us for much of that time, both times. But the kids stayed back in Seattle and stayed in school, and then we had the other grandparents stay with him in our house. But I had family medical. Well, I think we both used medical leave for that time. We didn't try to work remotely or anything.
Hi guys, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for sharing your stories and your side of it. My name is Mackenzie. I lost my dad to mesothelioma, and so I kind of feel like I can give the child's perspective a little bit on receiving that information, and I'm really sorry. Something I found extremely helpful that my parents told my brother and I. They set expectations for what the future could look like and what my dad was capable of doing and what he wasn't capable of doing. And I was very grateful for that, because there were certain things that I think normally my brother and I would expect both of our parents to be able to attend and to be able to do. And after his diagnosis, that wasn't the same. And so knowing going into a family vacation, for example, that we wouldn't be able to go on hikes, or that we were going to need to bring my dad's oxygen tank and we needed to know how to use it, and that we might not be able to stay for the full time. Those were all things that, even though they might have been hard to hear in the moment, it was extremely reassuring to know, because we had kind of the knowledge going in that might be a possibility. And so while I haven't experienced it myself, I wanted to just share that was really helpful for my brother and I. And I appreciate you guys sharing your sides of it, because it's very wonderful to hear that. And thank you.
Thank you, Mackenzie.
Thank you.
I have a question. Did you educate, because this is a rare disease, did you educate people first to let them know? Because the scanning, the PET scan, you see, it's a continuous cycle. Did you educate everybody first so that they can understand where you're going through?
I'm trying to remember. I don't think that we did a lot of education. I think we just kind of announced it. I mean, we told our kids probably a little bit more, and then let everybody else just Google it. So maybe we should have provided better guidance around some of that, but I don't. Yeah, and a lot of it true, and that was part of the other thing is that, a lot of people say what's next, and early on you don't know what's next. Like, we were getting second opinions, and so, just trying to, I don't know, it's just so hard to navigate this on so many layers.
I'm curious, because you guys both had different experience with social media, with one posting on social media and one not. How did you guys manage, or if you even experienced kind of the information overload, having to tell all of these people and the fatigue of I have this group of people and this group of people and everybody coming and asking all of this, and and kind of setting those boundaries and managing your own and insulating. I mean, I have 3 adult children and trying to insulate them and protect them and managing myself and my husband and this whole other world of like being bombarded with all of the questions. And
yeah, and I think that's the goal of having one of those sites like Caring Bridge. I'll just say Caring Bridge, even though that's the one we didn't use. My husband hated that name for whatever reason. He was just like, nah. That's a site like that is supposed to solve that problem. In real life, you can speak to your experience, but it didn't, because people still will text you individually. And obviously, members of your immediate family, your kids, your parents, those are just going to have to be individual conversations, even if you're repeating yourself quite a bit. Yeah, I mean, I guess in that way it was helpful that we weren't super public about it, because, the number of people who could reach out and text was very small. I want to hear your perspective on that exact question, but I will also say just that using one of those sites, I'll say that I felt a lot of pressure to only post good news updates. And for me, that was not, it kind of defeats the purpose, because you should be able to do updates whether they're good or bad. But I just wanted to only say happy news, and then it's not really serving its actual purpose. So.
Yeah, I think one of the hard things about posting it on a public level is all the feedback and recommendations you get. Like, try this, try that, and it's just like, okay, dude, like, if we need help, we'll reach out for it. And there's other people that are very valuable resources in that too. So I don't want to diminish some of those things, but when you ask for people's help for something, people that aren't qualified to have input into some of this stuff come up with some pretty crazy things. And so I think one of it was just the overload of people, just encouragement, messages, all that kind of stuff, but then also was kind of just filtering through some of the information and trying to nicely move on beyond some of these other recommendations. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but, in making it public, it did get us, some connections and resources that we needed that I don't think we would have gotten otherwise. And so I think you just kind of have to see what works best in your particular situation. For us, we have a pretty broad network of people, and if we hadn't made kind of a broad announcement, then we would have been getting even more direct emails and text messages and all those kind of things. So,
Hi, I'm Linda. Oh, you can go ahead. There you go.
I'll just piggyback off what he said, because he doesn't know some of the stuff I did, because I did it.
You're the caregiver and the spouse, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
So I have no shame in writing a post and saying, please don't leave any comments regarding opinions or thoughts. We don't need any recommendations. I know you mean well. Also, during this time, I'm not planning on answering texts. So thank you so much. You're welcome to text and support us, but I won't be answering. And like when he was in the hospital, please no visitors unless you're invited. Like, I don't care.
So let me ask you something. Were you always such a good limit setter? Or did this diagnosis get you there?
She's pretty good at setting limits and speaking her mind. And it helps that she's medical as well, so that she was a huge advocate in that regard.
Hi, I'm Linda, and this is a new journey for us. It started in December, so it was really easy at the beginning for our family and our friends to get it, because he was having surgery and there was a recovery period, and then he had treatment. And then when you're in like the waiting game or trying to determine, you're going from scan to scan and trying to figure out what to do next, like I still feel like I need support, but I don't know how to express to them that this isn't like a regular cancer. And how did you kind of navigate that when it wasn't like an obvious need that you, like, I don't need meals right now, but do you know what I mean? Like, it feels kind of, but people kind of drop off and they don't know really, I don't know. It's just more complicated than I thought.
My main response to that is just that's when you reach out to your people here, because they do get it and they will be here for you. Otherwise you do spend a lot of time educating your friends and having expectations of them that may or may not be realistic, but your meso community is here.
And each time like people sometimes know that we're having a scan, and then the next day they say, how is the scan? Like, how do you deal with that, whether it's not so great or,
Well, to my knowledge, I don't think we announce when my scans are. We'll just give an update later on. So we'll say, another scan will be in a few months, but we don't tell them specific dates. And then when we get the information back, which, it's only been a few scans since my surgery, but then we'll announce that, the scan was clear and, we're waiting for the next one.
Yeah, the number of people who knew our scan schedule were like in the single digits. So, and they were the people who could handle bad news.
Giving Julie a workout.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm a caregiver. My wife was diagnosed 5 years ago. I wanted you to kind of speak a little bit about the emotional aspect of it in terms of just how to deal with it with the kids, because we have 3 daughters and we have 4 grandchildren, 3 grandsons and 1 granddaughter, and we raised our grandson, and he's 15 now. So just how to mitigate some of the the stress and the emotion. How did you deal with that in terms of, just inside the home? Because a lot of things we keep, when I'm saying we're not super private, but we keep things within us as a family, and how do we, from day to day, because we do have to continue to go on and live, but sometimes did you seek out like some kind of counseling or, kind of other advocates, support groups or something like that? What would you suggest in terms of just how to work with within the family to kind of mitigate a lot of the stress that's involved with that?
So our family dynamics are a little bit different because our 2 oldest daughters are out of the home. My son, he's adopted, and so there were kind of another set of issues there because he'd already lost a couple parents. Now he's dealing with the potential loss of me, and so he has gone to counseling on a not regular basis but periodic basis as needed. And I think part of it is just to keep the conversation going, like pretty open dialogue and checking in, because he keeps things a little bit closer. But with my daughters, like we have pretty open communication, and so it's kind of like we don't talk about it all the time and we don't ignore it either. It's kind of like if it comes up and we want to talk about it, then there's kind of a natural conversation that takes place. But I guess we don't try to over talk it. We don't try to downplay it. We try to kind of land somewhere where it's just part of life, and if we need to talk about it, we do. And then if they need counseling, if they need support, then making sure that those resources are available for them.
It's a great question, and I don't know that I have a great answer for you, but I will say that just allowing emotions to happen when they do. Therapy is a great option as well. There are support groups out there specifically for kids. My younger daughter, I think, found a lot of help from a support group that we went to monthly, but then there was also a camp that she attended after my husband died, and I think there are also camps for kids with parents who are ongoing with cancer treatment. And I found that really, I think it's helpful for them to have somebody outside the family that they can talk to, because they might be worried about sort of like triggering big emotions within the family. And so for my younger daughter, really the main value she got out of going to that support group and the camp was having that one person that they became close friends, and she just felt like somebody my age knows what I'm going through, and they have a good bond. So it wasn't the group necessarily that helped her, but just the group provided her access to make that one friend.
I'm sorry, what? Well, I was just going to say that one of the things that impresses me about the two of you and everyone else who's spoken is sort of your acknowledgement that, this is a journey, and that the needs of family and of you all change depending upon what's happening at any given point in time, and that keeping communication open seems to be really important. I know that, though, for some families, that's not a value per se. And so I'm wondering, for anybody in the audience who has not chosen to share their diagnosis, if you could talk a little bit about that decision. It looks like Tanya. Tanya?
This may be a unique experience, but I have an 87-year-old mother and a 93-year-old father, and I was in the hospital for 10 days for surgery, and I'll never forget, like, wanting to stay in touch with them, and at the same time knowing how much they worry. I didn't want to share the details with them, so I was always so paranoid, like, that the alarm bells on the IV would go off when I'm talking to my dad or something like that. But I made this conscious decision, and I know it's personal to everybody who they share with and who they don't, but not to share the details with my parents. And I've gotten more open with them now, but I think it was definitely the right choice at the time, because it would have just been, I think, devastating to them and incredible. And physically, when they saw me, I was in New York, they were in Washington. Physically, once they saw me, it was much easier to talk about it, but it's still something that I try to protect them from.
100% legit.
So my husband just died in May, and when he was diagnosed with stage 4 pleural mesothelioma. And so we knew that he didn't have a lot of time. There was no surgery option, only chemo. And he was very social, and it was very important for him to have people know what was going on. So what I ended up doing is I had a little notepad on my phone, and as we were going through doctor's appointments or whatever was going on, I would make notes in my notepad, and then I would edit that down to a digestible message, and I had groups in my texts. And I would send a message to my family, who I was fine if everybody replied to all and heard the communication. And I had a group of his friends, and I had a group of his cousins. And so I had these and a group of neighbors. And so I had some specific groups, and I would send pretty much that same text out to everybody, so everybody had the same information. And he so appreciated that and would say it over and over again. Jill did such a great job keeping everybody up to date. She absorbed all this information. He really appreciated that. But regarding the education issue, I did find early on I was forced to do education with our contacts, because the messages were all, oh, it's amazing what they can do with cancer these days. He's going to be fine. And I live in a very religious community, and I have faith myself, but they were talking about miracles that could happen. And so I had to set it straight fairly early in the conversation that the prognosis was not good, that mesothelioma, he would die of mesothelioma. We just did not know the time frame. And so I would continue to get those positive messages, and I would continue to say, just be prepared. And when it happened very, very quickly when he passed away. So I think because of my messaging, more people were a little bit more prepared, though still shocked.
That's what I was saying, education. Educate the people that we have in our life so they understand what we're going through. Because it's hard. The scan, anxiety.
That's a good word.
Because it's like every time I do a scan, it's like, well, what is it? Is it all right? So that's why I was saying, educate people first, then take the ones who are closer to you and then be more personal with them. Yeah. Thank you.
So it sounds like it depends upon the relationships you have with people, whether you choose to share or not share.
Hi. I just wonder what you do when friends and family call you, burst into tears, and then you have to end up taking care of them instead of them trying to support you and help you deal with what you're dealing with. You have to end up consoling them. And that I find that very difficult.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I struggled a lot with that early on. Actually, there's a good friend of ours who used to come over and pray for me every Monday, and every time she would get over there and just burst into tears the whole time, and she was always apologizing. But I think after a while, I just got okay with it. Like, I'll let them cry. Like, if they want to cry, they can cry. That doesn't have to drain me emotionally necessarily. And just knowing that they're doing it from a place of love and concern. But I would say early on it was a bit frustrating because I didn't like this sappy kind of teary-eyed, expressions of how. But then after a while, it's like, you know what? They care about me. They love me. I'm just going to let them process how they need to process and be okay with that.
Shane has a much better answer than I have, which is you just learn the people that aren't you can't expect good help from, and you try to lean on the people who are offering you good support rather than the kind of support that ends up draining you. There's a child of the 70s. There used to be there was an album called Free to Be You and Me, and one of the songs was about helping, and it was like, some kind of help is the kind of help that helping's all about, and some kind of help is the kind of help we all can do without, and that's.
You should bring that back. That was a good album.
That was a good album.
Does anybody have anything else they want to share, or we can wrap it up?
Can I?
Wait, Heather?
I'll defer to questions from the audience.
Heather, did you want to say something, Heather?
Some people that I have talked to have found it advantageous to have like a content manager, so to speak. They have a very trusted person that posts the Caring Bridge, posts the GoFundMes, posts the updates, and all communication goes through that individual, which takes the oneness off of the caregiver and off of the people going through the stuff. So that is something to maybe think about if you have a loved one who wants to be useful and is good at posting and managing all of that sort of stuff. So I've talked to a number of people who do have a content or social media manager of sorts, and it helps a lot with that. And then the other thing about managing others' emotions, I just flat out told them it is not my job to manage your emotions. And, it was kind of harsh, but they kind of like, oh my gosh, you're right. And sometimes you have to be blunt. It's coming from a place of love, so we have to give grace as well. But just, sometimes people need to hear it's not my job.
This is a really interesting table. We're going to have people come and talk to you both.
So I was wondering if you could, I would like to share too, what if someone else, if other people could share things that they found especially helpful. One is I have friends, I ask them that whenever they're going to the grocery store to shoot me a text to ask me if I need anything, just because it's really hard just to go and get one thing, and they have felt really good about that. I have another friend who sends Bob a card. She lives out of state every week just to get well card or a hug. And then the support group that I do at home, they recommended this book called There's No Card for This. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it's written by people who have had a lot of trauma, and it goes through each chapter about the different kind of support that you should be giving people that need it, and it's really well written and very informative.
Good resources.
I just want to echo what Heather said. My wife, when she was sick, she had a friend who would send out text and or emails with all the information because everyone was wanting to know, especially after you went to the doctor, and it was just too much for Chris to have to respond. So there was a point person who she spoke to or I spoke to who did send out information, which was really helpful. The other thing, and my wife she did not hesitate to ask for help or make her needs known, but she created a buddy system. So every week she had a different friend that she was close to who would check in with her on a daily basis. Chris didn't have to respond necessarily if she didn't want to, but there was just someone sort of checking in to see, hey, I'm here. Do you want to talk? Some friends would send funny jokes to her. Each person sort of had so every week there was a different person, and she kind of had a schedule. I did the same thing for myself, which I was a little more hesitant to do, but it was actually very helpful. And I actually continued it after Chris passed away, because usually the people are around that first few weeks, that first month, people are around, they know you, but I kind of kept it for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months after Chris passed. And I had a friend that would just check in with me every day, and then a different people would come the next week, and that was very helpful for us. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, everybody's got a different story, but our kids were older, so they were old enough to be told. But we had lost a son earlier, so we have learned that there are caring people that will reach out, and we made a decision to be upfront. We were not going to hide in society. We were going to face this head on. And so the biggest thing I would say just hearing some of these stories is it was a one-way communication. I promise we have large families. It's a small town. We know a lot of people, lots of support. But I was not going to repeat this story over and over and over again. And so I said, please don't contact me. But I made a promise that I would keep them updated in detail when anything new came about. So we didn't hide anything. We educated them, as a good term. We shared honest emotion and feelings. But for the most part, people respected that, and they kept their distance. And I realize everybody's different, but that seemed to work well for us.
Is there somebody else?
We got a hand down here, yeah.
Back corner.
My name's Lynn. So my dad was diagnosed in February this year, so I just went through it not too long ago. My dad and my mom, they basically talk to me every day, if they can. So we didn't. Well, they just told me they went to the hospital because my dad was coughing, and they didn't really get in touch with me for almost a month. And we were messaging, of course, just not calling or FaceTime. So by the time they tell me, I feel like they went through the emotion phase already by themselves. So it was definitely a shock for me. But I wish they would tell me earlier so that we can discuss. We can go through it together. So that's one take from a child perspective, who to whoever got diagnosed, and even for a caregiver, there is a period of time that you need to digest your own emotions. I think what I did wrong is I told some of my close friends what happened, and they just went really bluntly with caring. Well, with caring about me, they're just telling me their experience of losing their parent. So that made me even more devastated. Yes, I wish I didn't do that. And they're another friend told me yeah, just a parent from my kid's family just got diagnosed with tumor in their brain and was passing out their day. It was I don't want to hear about those stories. Give me some time to digest my own emotion. After maybe a few months, we accept it and move on with it. I can talk more. Yeah, I think that's something especially you have friends that's really direct with you, when they're talking about how they're feeling. I know they meant for good, but really, it was giving me a hard time. it's like I'm only a caregiver, and even for the patient, I think they even more need more mental support.
I think sometimes it's not easy to know what you need, and then suddenly when something happens, you'll suddenly know what you don't need.
Yes.
You know, and I think it's important when you have those moments to be able to sort of speak it. Say, this is not helpful for me at this moment. Anybody else?
I actually have a question. I have a question for people. I was curious. I didn't hear anyone speak about the experience of being, talking to, as a adult child, talking to your parents or to your siblings about your diagnosis. And I wondered if anyone here had that experience or wanted to speak about that experience.
Our youngest child, she's a nurse practitioner, so she's very medical and all this type of thing. But she came over to the house one day and brought a book. And this book was for me to detail my life. She wanted me to start with my earliest memory and every major, minor thing in life. I've been filling it out for months and months. And she says, this is what I want. I want to know, what wisdom can you give me? What mistakes did you make? How do I not make those mistakes? You know, all the things that I would want to ask you. And I'm hoping you're going to be here, but in case you're not, this little book will help me. And I thought, you know, she can pass it around to her siblings. She could pass it around to her children. And that was really intuitive of her. Very. Yeah.
What a nice legacy to leave her.
So you'd have to run all the way across.
She's getting her steps in.
My name's John Anderson. My wife passed away a year and a half ago. Going through the things in the house and cleaning house, I found some diaries. Some were for her granddaughter to read, and they were about stories when granddaughter visited the house and little quotes of arguments if she didn't like something I did or this, and she explained things to her in the book. I haven't given her that book yet, but I also found another book that she kept as she was growing up, the grandchild, and she kept little meticulous notes and things into it. Several months ago, I gave her that book to read when she had time. I said, find a place, read it. The other book, I don't know yet. And then also, I found one that I gave to my daughter, who is on the board, and probably at a meeting, of personal notes that she had left behind. I keep finding these things in corners, and I haven't cleaned the house out yet. And I just gave that to my daughter recently, and I read through the notes, and my daughter got a little with me for a minute because it said personal. I says, well, my wife was personal to me. So what she knows, I know, and if there's any secrets, I'm going to find them. And they were very good. I didn't read all the notes. I can only read so far, and I broke down, I covered it up, gave it to the daughter. But it's a good thing to pass on, future generations to understand it, family to understand it. And
so
let it go from there.
Julie,
we have one more back here.
The one thing I got from my adult children was their frustration of people coming up. They wanted anonymity. They wanted to kind of process this in private, and having all of these people coming up and like, hey, what's going on with your dad? Hey, what's going on with your dad? Hey, what's going on with your dad? And their anger was, if we were small children, people would leave us alone. Like, they would respect our boundary. They would give us peace, and they would show us grace if we were small. And they would let our parents protect us. But because we're adults, they feel like they're entitled to kind of violate us and bombard us with all of these questions. And these are questions that it's like, ask my mom, ask my dad, stop coming to me. Especially with my daughter, because we both work in mental health. And she works at the clinic that I had just left. And everybody there, instead of coming to me, was bombarding her, like, what's going on with your mom? And so they were just very, very angry. And so I think that they just kind of isolated themselves and only had each other to talk to and to depend on, and to the point where they wouldn't even talk to us. And it was very heartbreaking for me to watch my adult children kind of go through this, because it almost was like we have no one, because everybody was afraid to come to us. So they became these people was like, they were the information, like, oh, well, let's go to the kids because we don't want to bother him and we don't want to bother her, so we'll just ask the kids. And they're so crushed because they're dealing and trying to cope with this idea of, my dad is going to die and we're in our 20s, we're babies, and you know, my dad's supposed to be here when I'm older, and he's supposed to be here when we get married, and he's supposed to be here when we have kids, and we're not supposed to watch our mom go through this. So they didn't have this space to grieve. So I think that people don't recognize, like, just because they're adults, they also deserve this peace. Like, let's treat them like they were small children and give them that space and give them that grace. And so I think we're not mindful of what children are going through because they're adults. And so we're super mindful of little kids, and we just completely dismiss these adult children. And it's just as heartbreaking and just as hurtful, and just like, they're still children and they're losing their parents. And like, we really need to show them grace and really kind of be there to embrace them just as much, because it really is, it doesn't matter if they're 25, 30, 40, like, let's look at them as this little kid because their mom and dad or whoever. So my kids are just very angry at the way kind of everybody else is treating them, and not getting that space that they want and feel that they deserve, because people are like, well, you're an adult, you should be able to cope.
That's such an important point. Thank you. I think we're about to run out of time. And Claudine, did you want to say something before? Or am I imagining that?
Yeah, I did have my hand up. And I don't know, maybe it works pretty well as just kind of a closing thought. I don't know if you have anything. But I guess one of the things I wanted to make sure to share today is that living through a serious disease like mesothelioma can bring your family really close together. It can eliminate some of the petty things that might have bothered you before. And there are times when that can feel awful. It can feel awful that you're like, oh, we're so close because of this cancer, because you wish the cancer didn't exist. So I guess I just wanted to acknowledge that that's a thing that families go through. And it just can be just a really confusing mix of emotions. But ultimately, it's a welcome thing to know that you all have each other's backs, and that you've been through this horrible thing together. So I just wanted to give voice to that.
Thank you. Shane, do you have anything you want to wrap up with?
No, other than just saying thank you,
Thank you
to you guys. I mean, this is our first one of these to come to, and you guys have been so welcoming, and you guys have been so helpful over the last year, and so we're just grateful just for the interactions and just friendships that we've made in this community. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.